two key points which is important for us to know that there's a term called DDT, which expands to desired dough temperature, which is from 23 degrees Celsius to 27 degrees Celsius. Now, why is this very important? Is because of the yeast in the dough. This is the ideal temperature when the yeast reproduces at its optimal level. Now, there are some more key points which are really important to be kept in mind when you're preparing a dough. Your dough, while proving it, it should always be covered and there should not be any exposure to air because if that is there, it forms a skin on the dough, which is not very desirable. Another thing is humidity. We all know that a certain temperature range is important for the yeast to reproduce optimally, but not a lot of people know that humidity is also required. That is why in a lot of bread making videos online, you will find that people say that you need to cover your dough with a damp cloth. That is so that it provides it humidity. So temperature and humidity are the two important things which are required for the yeast to grow optimally. After your proving process is done, you basically shape up your dough in whatever desired shape you require, and then you score the doughs. Now, scoring was anciently done because when they used to prepare bread, they used to do it in a large group. So people could identify their breads from others. They used to score it. But then later on, they found out that it has a lot of benefits other than just recognizing your own bread. So one of the benefits is that it opens up a bread in a certain place, which allows the steam to be released and the bread to expand, so that your bread does not crack from the side or from the bottom. So that is the scientific reason in what way scoring helps. And then in this process itself, you have two kinds of folds, which is called slap and fold and stretch and fold. So both are pretty similar, but there's a basic difference. Slap and fold is done when you remove your complete dough and you put it on your bench, and then you lift the dough and slap it again on the bench. That way, you're stretching the dough by the basic action of slapping and folding. Stretching and folding is done when you have your dough in a particular container and you do not have enough space. So you just stretch the dough within your container and you fold it upon itself. Both the things stretch the dough in terms of forming the gluten within it. Now, our third step would be baking. Baking is generally just when you get the dough, you shape it. It has risen to a particular size, which is ideal for that kind of a bread. Then you put it in your oven to bake. Now, you might have seen a lot of people use steam for baking. So steam plays different roles depending on how you use it. Suppose if you're making baguettes and you release the steam in the starting of the process, it gives your bread a really crispy crust. Whereas if steam is added throughout the process, you get things like dinner rolls, which are extremely soft. So steam can play different roles. It can have different effects on your breads depending on how you use it. Now, secondly, I would like to mention out the oven temperature. Um this is something which a lot of people get it wrong. So no matter how good a oven you have, the oven never heats up equally. Matlab, some parts of the oven would be really hot and some would be relatively colder. So a good thing to do when you are really getting serious into bread making is buy yourself a oven temperature oven thermometer, which you can keep it inside the oven, which gives you the accurate reading of the oven instead of just depending on the display which is provided, because most of the time that is not 100% accurate. Now, the fourth part, which is very often not taken into consideration, is cooling. Now, why is cooling very important? So let's get into a little bit of science of it. So when a raw dough is kept inside an oven, it has starch molecules, which just a second, with gelatinize. Gelatinize is the term at 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you remove the dough outside of the thermometer, when you think the process is completed of baking, the temperature of the dough falls below 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and so the steam or the moisture which is present in the dough wants to escape, and this process is known as retrogradation. Now, when you slice the bread just after it has come out of the oven, the moisture has not escaped completely, and hence you end up with a soggy bread because the steam which was supposed to escape from the starch molecules is yet present in that. So it is really important. I know it's very tempting. People who have baked bread at home, they would understand that it's really tempting to just slice open a hot loaf of bread and eat it. But it's really important that you let the bread cool down. In that way, you have a very good crumb structure for your bread. And also, people believe that because you let the bread cool down properly and the moisture which is present in the bread evaporates how it is supposed to, the bread stays moist for a longer period of time. It does not dry out very quickly. This is another theory which people tend to believe. So this makes up our stages of bread making. Now we move on to methods of bread making. We basically have two. I'm sorry for the numbering there. I just got that wrong. So we have two main processes of bread making. The first one, which is called bulk fermentation, and this is a simple process where you just add everything at once. And it is a very traditional method used for very simple breads. You can consider commercial loaves or bread rolls, which use this method where you just add in all your products, all your raw ingredients, mix it up, or you, okay, so sorry for the confusion there. So the basic difference between CBP, which is your second part of bread making, and bulk fermentation is, bulk fermentation used to be where you add in all the ingredients. It used to be the, the primitive method where you add in all the ingredients and you just let it stay there, and gluten forms depending on the amount of yeast and the dough temperature. So depending on that, you just let the dough rest and gluten forms. Whereas things have evolved in commercial bakeries need to be a lot more efficient nowadays and a lot more time saving. So in the second process, which is Shirley-Wood process, CBP, it uses mechanical energy to form the gluten. So in this process also you add in all the ingredients, but to make the process a little bit more faster, you use mechanical energy instead of just leaving the dough by itself, which is done in the bulk fermentation. I hope I've got that clear. Now, moving on to the sub methods, we have a straight dough method, which everyone is aware of. It is just a variant of the BFP in which you just combine all the ingredients together, you knead it, and then you bake it. Next, we have a delayed salt method. So as I told everyone that nowadays bakeries need to be really efficient with their time management. So delayed salt method, what it does is that it allows the yeast to work up the dough without the salt constraining it. So once the yeast has worked up with the dough, after your knockback process, you add in the salt. So that allows the yeast to work up quickly, expand in the dough, and after your knockback process, you can add in your remaining salt. The third method which we have is sponge and dough process. In this, a sponge with one part of the dough is made previously, and the other part is allowed to rest along with the addition of yeast. So your yeast works on a smaller portion of flour and water and other things so that the process is quick. That basically means if you have 100 grams of flour and you divide it into 50 and 50, all your yeast, which is supposed to be for 100 grams of flour, acts up on just 50 grams of flour. So the process is quickened, and after that is done, it is the remaining flour is added into it. So that is the sponge and dough process. The fourth process is ferment dough process, which is almost similar to the sponge and dough process, but then it varies in the factor of how it's used. So ferment dough process or ferment dough method is used when you're working with really rich doughs. So in that way, what you do when you divide the two parts of your flour, uh, the part in which the yeast is added does not get the rich ingredients such as milk or eggs. The other part gets it, so that the fats does not come in between the action of the yeast, and the yeast gets to work up along with the dough and water, just with those two things, so that the process is quick, and the second part gets to mix along with the fat content, which is the milk or eggs or anything else. And then after those two have mixed separately, the yeast has done its job on just the flour and water. Those both are mixed together. So this also helps us save time. And as that is very important, I've already mentioned that. Moving on to the next part, which is hydration. Hydration plays a really important role because it determines how your crumb texture is going to be. So if you can see on your screens, on your left hand side, you have a dough. I think it's a sourdough bread, which is made from 80% hydration. Whereas on your right hand side, you can see a dough which is made with 60% hydration. There are three factors which I am aware of, which plays a role in why this effect happens. The first thing is that because you have a higher percentage of air, of water in your dough, what happens during baking is that the water evaporates. Hence, it gets trapped in your gluten strands, and you can see those uneven pockets which are created. That is also created because of the water evaporating. The second thing is that the gluten formation in your dough is directly proportional to the water content present in it. Of course, that's not true to the complete extreme level, but then water is directly proportional to your gluten formation. And there was another point. Okay, I think these are the 2 points which I've written down. So you can see the difference in how a 60% hydration is different from a 80% hydration dough. And moving on to the next part. Okay, I have a chart here which classifies the different kinds of bread. So we have one, two, three, four, five different kinds of classification. And within those classification, we have three or two different types of further classification. So suppose let's take the first classification, which is on the basis of hydration. Now you can see it is divided into three parts, which is stiff dough, standard dough, and rustic dough. Just reading through it, stiff dough is something which has a hydration percentage of 50 to 57. You can find these in bagels, pretzels, and those which are, in which you want a dense, firm structure. Standard dough would be your sandwich loaves, commercial loaves, which you find in the market, which is 57 to 65% hydration. Sandwich bread, French breads, dinner rolls are the examples. Rustic breads are again those sourdough breads, baguettes, and all those breads, which have a hydration greater than 65%. Moving on to the next classification is based on fat content present in the dough, which is divided into lean dough, enriched dough, and a rich dough. So lean dough, which contains very little to no fat.
Chirag, apologies. I think we've lost a screen share. I think you need to reshare your
Yeah,
PPT.
yeah. I'll just do it.
Yeah. Dhruv, we'll get back to your question. I see your hand raised. We'll get back to it.
Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, yes, it.
Okay, so I was talking about the classification based on the fat content. We have three different types of classification within that, which is a lean dough, enriched dough, and a rich dough. Lean dough is where you have extremely no fat or very little insignificant amounts of fat. You can see these in baguettes. Enriched dough is anywhere between 5 to 20% fat content. Now, fat content can be in the form of butter, oil, milk, any of these, not just butter. The third classification is a rich dough, which is anything greater than 20% of fat content. You can find these in croissant, Danish pastries, as these pastries have a high amount of fat, which is layered between the dough sheets. The third classification is flatbreads, which is further divided into easted and uneasted. Easted flatbreads, the examples are pizza, focaccia, crackers, and uneasted Indian chapati can be an example of uneasted flatbreads. Within methods, you have a direct or straight dough method, indirect or sponge method. So I've covered the methods in the earlier slides, so I won't be really going into this. The fifth and the final classification is based on the type of yeast. So you can classify this into three types, which is commercial yeast, natural yeast, and uneasted. Okay, just a second. Yeah, that is it for my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chirag. Dhruv, we had your hand raised. If there's only a single question, we'll take it right now. If you have two, three questions, I think we'll take it towards the end of the presentation.
No, actually, the screen was covered by something, so
Acha,
that
okay,
that's
no
what I
worries.
was asking.
No worries. We will share
Now,
the
now it's
PDF.
fine. Yeah, now it's
Yeah,
fine.
we'll
Yeah.
share the PDF versions with you anyway. All right. So I'll get on to the second part of the presentation today. I'll be covering preferments. So just give me a moment while I share my screen. You guys can see the PPT?
Yes, Chinmay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Um, first of all, hi guys. Today I'll be doing a presentation on the pre-ferments in bread making. So as Chirag spoke, there are various types and styles to make bread. One of them is either through wild bacteria or culture, which is sourdough, and the second one is through commercially available yeast. So commercially available yeast is a fairly new topic, wherein it's a few hundred years old, whereas sourdough has been going on for ages. And somewhere in the middle, we all forgot about what is sourdough and how it was made. Today, it's back in vogue, and that will be covered later on by Paritosh, Drisha, and Asta. So, pre-ferments. What is a pre-ferment, and why should you really care about it? So first of all, pre-ferments are made with yeast. Okay, I'll get on to what sort of yeast in the second part of this slide. So first of all, it's an indirect fermentation. That means some portion of the dough is allowed to ferment on its own. So you'll add a small amount of yeast, a small amount of flour, and some amount of water based on the percentage and the formula that you're using or the style of pre-ferment that you're using, and it will first be allowed to mature and ferment on its own. So in reality, you are somewhat creating some sort of a culture or some sort of a starter for the rest of your dough. What does it do? It's the next best thing to sourdough. So what happens in sourdough? You're given a culture, and the culture has its own flavor and gives some sort of characteristic to the bread. Anything is better than an insipid, tasteless bread that is just made with a straight dough. And straight dough, trust me, guys, is something which you should make only if you don't have an option. If someone gives you 2 days or 3 days to make a loaf of bread, you might as well use a nice method. Maybe use sourdough, maybe use a pre-ferment, and make it in the right manner. So the flavor development in terms of a pre-ferment is second to none in any sort of bread that contains commercial yeast. By commercial yeast, I mean to say the Saccharomyces um, cerevisiae. So that is the commercially available yeast. So I'll speak to you about the four different styles of pre-ferments. So first one is pate fermente or old dough. It is a French innovation. Second one is Polish from Poland. Third one is sponge. Fourth one is biga from Italy. And fifth one is obviously saldo. Saldo is a pre-ferment but is not made with commercial yeast. I've just added it in here because it does come under the broad category, but saldo itself is a huge subject and will be covered later on in the last two parts of this presentation. So I'll quickly get on with it. So pate fermente simply means old dough. It has been used for ages by the French bakers because you need to understand the history of yeast. Commercially available yeast was never reliable for the longest period of time, and only during the early 1900s did yeast become somewhat consistent in its production, because someday you'd have great quality yeast and the next day it would be really bad quality. So what the bakers found out was that you just take a little bit of yesterday's dough and incorporate it with today's dough. So what happens is, since the yesterday's dough is already proved and it has a yeast content into it, you add a little bit of the dough into today's fresh batch. So there is already a culture, there's already a yeast working into it. So the flavor sort of transfers and assists in the proving and adds flavor to the bread. And this again, as I said, is not really a pre-ferment. It's perhaps just a little bit of old dough mixed with it. And as we all know, any sort of bread has some salt. So by and large, this is the only pre-ferment that contains any sort of salt. The other three, whatever I'm going to do today, has no salt. As we all know, salt retards the growth of yeast, and it's a fact that salt does not kill yeast. Yes, if salt and yeast are in direct contact in the dry form, it may kill it. But if there is a water barrier, or if there is some sort of flour that is mixed, even if it's just a spoon of flour, there is enough sugars in the flour to feed the yeast. So don't worry, guys. You might add salt and yeast together. It's not going to kill your yeast. So the uh, the advantage of the pate fermente is, one, it's easy to make because there's nothing really to make or prepare. You're just using a small bit of yesterday's dough. It's very cheap to make because, as I said, there's no cost involved and the payoff is huge. The flavor is unmatched, and anything, as I said, is better than a straight dough. Now coming on to Polish. Polish is something that was a very foreign concept to me until about a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, where one of our seniors told me. I'll give you the story later on. So it's originally from Poland and has been used in the pastry production. So in your third year, or maybe I don't know if you've read, a bread called babka was made, or is made even today. It is also popular in Israel, Turkey, and all of these regions. And babka and baba ram is a cake, an yeasted cake on kugelpuff. All of these cakes are from Europe, and it was traditionally made using a Polish. So what is a Polish? It is originally from Poland and is, as I said, was used in pastry production. It is an equal mixture in terms of weight of flour and water. Now, guys, what do I mean by equal in terms of weight? Now, you can't take 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. It's not the same thing because 1 cup of flour is going to weigh 125 grams and 1 cup of water weighs 250 grams. So it's in fact 1:2 if you take it in terms of weight. So another small tip is when you bake, always try and use a measuring scale, or even when you cook, try and use a measuring scale because then your measurements are exact and you'll more or less get a consistent product. So now getting back into the more important part, so you make a dough or you make a mixture wherein you add equal amounts of water and flour and an extremely small portion of yeast. The yeast amount is decided based on how long you have for the pre-ferment to ripen and get ready to use. So the yeast percentage could remain anywhere between 0.8 to 1%. So what is this percentage? So baker's percent is something wherein you take 100%, which is always the quantity of flour, and 1% or 0.8% of the flour. So if I'm taking 100 grams of flour, I'm going to add maybe just about zero point 0.8 grams or 1 gram of yeast to this entire mixture. And later on, I'll add maybe another gram or two to sort of balance it out and get a right product. You need a very small percentage, guys, of yeast because you're going to let it ferment for a good 12 to, sorry, apologies, 6 to 16 hours. The yeast is going to grow and you don't really need a lot. So as I said, it's a 100% hydration dough wherein there is equal amounts of water and flour. It is more like a batter than a dough. And salt, as I said, is never included in Polish or any of the further pre-ferments. Now, if you can see the photo here, the container on the left-hand side, you can see is at a very low level. It is almost like a batter. And after about 16 hours, you can see that it has almost tripled in size. So you can see the activity of the yeast and it is now ready and it is now fermented. So before I move on to the next topic, there is something called protease that is present in the flour. So when you add, so when in terms of Polish, which is a very wet sort of a pre-ferment, the protease activity is very high. What does this do? This basically helps in the in increasing the extensibility of the dough. So this helps in various aspects. It could be getting you more volume in the dough and also helps in easier shaping of the final loaf. So in fact, guys, if you are ever going to use a pre-ferment, I suggest you use a Polish because this is one of the easiest methods to get a high quality loaf without putting too much effort in. And the kicker is that gluten development is better because, as Chirag said, the hydration and the gluten formation has a lot to do with the amount of liquid used. So more liquid enables the gluten to form better. So moving on to the sponge. Now, sponge is somewhat of a hack or a cheat, I'd say. It is the fastest pre-ferment available because, as I said, something is better than nothing. You'd have some sort of flavor than no flavor. You don't want anything to taste of yeast because that is a sign of a bread that is either overproofed or has too much yeast or something is wrong with it. So sponge method is something where you combine 1/3 or 1/2 of the total flour quantity. So for example, if I have 90 grams of flour, I will take 30 grams of the flour and add all the yeast. Say there is 2 grams of yeast. I'll add all of that together, add enough liquid to make a sort of a dough, a sort of a loose dough, and then in turn let it rise. So the rise points could be about an hour, and it's not more than an hour because the fermentation is quite fast. It's going to be warm, and it's the easiest pre-ferment to make. So when the sponge is doubled in size and starts receding a little bit in the middle, the dough is ready and the remaining ingredients are mixed to make the final dough. Sponge can be used in enriched doughs such as brioche and so on and so forth. It is a good flavor enhancer. As you can see, here is another example. You can see that one part of the flour, all of the yeast and some liquid has been added onto the quart container to your left. And in about an hour, suddenly you see that the dough has risen into 3. Now I move on to biga. So biga is just a word for pre-ferment. It's an Italian word for pre-ferment, found in Italy and now used across the world. It is the stiffest of any pre-ferments, wherein it has only 50% hydration. So if there is 100 grams of flour, I'm only going to add 50 grams of water. So it's extremely stiff and it is closer to almost like a chapati dough, or in fact, even stiffer than a chapati dough. So as I said, it is just a generic term for pre-ferment and the hydration level is at 50 to 60%. It is in fact the same thing as Polish with just 50% less hydration. and the yeast amount all remains the same. It's just for a different product. Breads such as focaccia, ciabatta are all made with something like a biga. There is no salt added into it. And a quick fact about ciabatta: it is the Italian cousin to the French baguette. And believe it or not, it was only invented in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, by an Italian baker. And today it is suddenly taken over the world. And a sandwich such as a panini is traditionally made with the ciabatta. Focaccia, as we all know, is eaten and relished by all of us. And we will even do these breads in the third year. It is doused in olive oil. You can add herbs, you can add olives, and sometimes also made with semolina. Areas such as Genoa, Sicily are all very, very famous for good focaccia. It's all an artisanal thing in Italy because a pizza maker is called a pizzaiolo, a focaccia, the place where focaccia is made is called a focacciara, and a gelato maker is called a gelateria. So these are a few small informations about Biga. So now quickly towards the last two parts of my presentation, I'm going to be speaking about how do you make one of these pre-ferments. So it's a very easy process. Honestly, it takes little to no effort. It can be made from anywhere between 6 to 16 hours before the final dough is mixed. Pate fermente, as I said, is an exception to this because the dough is already ready. You just add it into today's mixture. So based on the formula you add, always use a formula, guys. Don't, unless you are formulating something on your own, even then write it down so that you don't go wrong anywhere during the process of bread making. So I'll just quickly go through the stages of ripeness. So for a poolish, the surface will be covered with small bubbles, and in fact you should see those bubbles breaking. It's almost as if it's alive and it's active. You'll see small fissures, a small sort of an earthquake sort of a thing in terms of the dough. So that's a great sign that the poolish is at its peak ripeness. If I'm not wrong, you can do a float test with the poolish, and if it floats up, it means the poolish is ready. For a biga and a sponge, it's both are the same, wherein they will rise up to an extent, and in the middle it would have domed, and it will start receding. So the goal is to have a pre-ferment at its prime ripeness when you're ready to use. If it is too early, you might not get the right kind of product, and even if it is overproof, then you will have lesser of dough volume, and it might even start affecting your final dough flavor. To the final part of my presentation, I'm just going to quickly talk about the quantities of yeast used. As Chirag explained about the ideal dough temperature, the desired dough temperature, there is a temperature wherein yeast can also survive. So when we are making any of these pre-ferments, you try and have room temperature, which is anywhere between 21 to 23 degrees Celsius or 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Use whatever you want, but anywhere except the US, we use Celsius. So this is why I'm trying to speak to you in Celsius here. And this is the length of ripening. So as you can notice here, the longer the time you have, the lesser yeast you use. Why? Because yeast tends to multiply and it's going to grow anyway. So too much yeast for 16 hours could end up in disaster. So be extremely careful and really plan ahead. Bread is not something you wake up in the morning and you want to eat in the next 1 hour. You want bread. It's not possible. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, lot of patience. It's almost as if you're caring for a child, wherein you need to do the right things at the right time. Otherwise, you're going to have a really bad product. So with that, that comes to the end of my presentation. Just a few references. One is Bread by Jeffrey Hammelman. I think you guys should really have a look at this book. It is often referred to as the Bible for any bakers. Jeffrey Hammelman is the head baker at King Arthur Flour in the United States of America. He is an acclaimed baker and has won the gold medal of the Baking Olympics in the 90s. Baking and Pastry by the Culinary Institute of America is another great book for not only baking but also pastry. All of these books are available on the Gourmet Marshall Resource Center, and I've tried to stick to that because everybody has the same resources. Lastly but not the least, I'd like to thank Chef Samuel, Aviral Kumar, and Abhiram Sharma, my seniors, because these three were instrumental in trying to tell me that, okay, bread is not just making soft rolls or garlic rolls or rosemary rolls. There's much more to bread than that. And there's a lot more to be learned. I still believe there's a lot to be learned. So just a thank you to you, Chef, and Aviral and Abhiram as well. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to take questions towards the end of the session. Thank you. Over to Paritosh.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Chinmay. So let me give me some time to screen my share. So yes, sourdough. So let's start about like what is sourdough. So sourdough is nothing, just a mixture of flour and water in a particular ratio, which is kept at an optimum temperature, because of which the wild yeast and the bacteria present in it start fermenting it, and which gives it a very unique acidity. It is used as a leavening agent in the breads instead of using the commercial yeast. Asta and Risha will tell you more about how to make a sourdough starter at your home in the coming presentations. So a sourdough starter is also known as a natural sour or a natural starter, since it has a pH of 3.5, or it lies between the pH 3.5 to 5.0. A sourdough is of three types. Type 1, the traditional one, what we are talking about today, and the type 2, which is a liquid form of the traditional one, out of which the wild yeast and the lactobacillus bacteria is being extracted and kept. And the type 3 is the dried form of the type 2, right from the type 2. The type 2 and type 3 are used industrially, but not alone. They are combined with the commercial yeast because they are not self-sufficient to give the proper fermentation. Since sourdough has only two ingredients, which is flour and water, the choice of flour and water what you're using is very important, and it affects the taste of the sourdough appreciably. So the wild yeast present in the sourdough holds, if you compare it with the commercial yeast, it holds a high amount of acidity, which act as a natural preservative for bread, which helps it to last longer. You must have heard, even if you know little about sourdough, you must have heard that a particular country's sourdough is very famous. This is all because of the combination of wild yeast present in the environment there. Thus, environment matters a lot. Coming to the history, it is speculated that the sourdough dates back to the end of the last ice age, that is 11,000 years back. It relates to the origin of the agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. So here, if you can see, the Fertile Crescent is being surrounded by three water bodies: the Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea, and the Persian Gulf. It is where the current Egypt, where the current Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and some parts of Turkey lies. So it is said that, not said, it is speculated that the sourdough is an accidental discovery, where someone might have forget to we kept the dough, kept the leftover dough overnight, and in a haste baked that in the morning, because of which it might have tasted well, so they started doing it. Coming to the proof that the oldest sourdough bread dates back from 3700 before Christ and was excavated from the Switzerland. In 1850s, the late 1850s, the commercial yeast was being introduced in the market, because of which the long process of making a sourdough bread was mislaid somewhere. Talking about the science part of it, there are two things which we should know, like what makes the sourdough bread rise if not using the commercial yeast, and what gives it that hallmark taste, the sour taste what we are looking for. Well, talking about the rise, the wild yeast is a fungus. Yes, the yeast is a fungus. So the wild yeast, the fungus, breaks down the sugar present in the starch and convert it into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Why does the yeast do that? Because while it is producing alcohol and carbon dioxide, it is also producing the energy which he consumed for his survival. So the carbon dioxide, which is being produced by the yeast, gets trapped between the structure matrix of the gluten and the flour, and which gives the very good crumb texture and holes in the bread. If you can see in this picture, these are the gaps sorry. These are the gaps in which the CO2 gets trapped, and this is the structure created by the gluten. The name of the Y yeast are listed here, which are Candida milleri, Candida humilis, and Saccharomyces exiguus, which is different from the commercial yeast, whose name is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So, what happens to the alcohol which is being produced in the yeast consumption of sugar? We'll talk about it in the next slide. The taste. The taste of the sourdough, the acidic taste, comes from the two acids present in the, which is lactic acid and the acetic acid. These acids are formed due to the bacterial fermentation. The bacteria, the lactobacillus bacteria, is present in the dough in different type of forms, and it respirates anaerobically. It respirates anaerobically and produce lactic acid and ethanol. If you can see in this image, these are the bacteria, which is it is a microscopic view of the lactobacillus bacteria. Don't worry, that bacteria is always present in our gut and is very good for our health. Even this bacteria is present in the yogurt what we eat daily. The ethanol produced by the lactobacillus and the yeast is later oxidized by the oxygen present in the dough and produces acetic acid. The perfect balance of acetic acid and lactic acid gives that hallmark for taste of sourdough bread. Major steps in bread making. These steps might not be same in every recipe. A baker, or according to a recipe or according to the chef, these steps might change or might not be present in the particular recipe. But let's see what are the basics, what are the major steps. First is autolyse. Autolyse is a process in which we keep the flour and water we gently mix the flour and water, making sure that we are not forming gluten, and we keep it for a good for a short amount of time, that is 10 to 30 minutes, and in that time the flour gets hydrated very well. After that, we add the rest of the ingredients, which is starter, yeast, salt, whatever you're adding, and we give a final mix to the dough and keep it for bulk fermentation. What is bulk fermentation? Bulk fermentation is nothing, just the first fermentation, which lasts for a very long time. So while we are fermenting the dough in the bulk fermentation, we make sure we either stretch or fold the dough or slap or fold, depends on the chef or on the recipe, which helps in the formation of the gluten. This is done while the bulk fermentation is going on. After the bulk fermentation, we divide the dough and shape it. Post that, we keep it for the bench rest. Bench rest is nothing but another name for secondary fermentation. After secondary fermentation, we keep the dough. We score the dough for the baking. Scoring is very important here, not just only for the look of it, but also while we score the bread, the steam generating inside the bread loaf has a space to come out, which helps in the spring rise in the oven. The spring rise happens in the first quarter of the baking, in which we make sure that enough steam is there inside the oven, which helps it. Steam not only helps in the spring rise, but also gelatinize the starch on the outer surface of the bread, which gives it a very good the hallmark crunch what we are looking for in the crust. Also steam after that which is followed by the Maillard reaction, which gives a very good color to the dough. Autolyse. Why autolyse is important? Not every chef does it, but yeah, it is important. The autolyse is just mixing of flour and water before forming the complete dough and keeping it for 20 to 30 minutes. What it does is it hydrates the flour very well. Flour has two important content, which is amylase and the protein gliadin and glutenin, commonly known as gelatin. So what happens with amylase, the enzyme present in the endosperm of the wheat grain, if you remember classes from Self Central, first year. So the endosperm of the wheat grain contains this enzyme, which acts on enzyme naming amylase, which acts on the sugar present in the starch and breaks it down into simpler sugar molecule, which helps the yeast or the starter what you are adding to feed it on easily. Also gives a very good aroma. Also gives a very good aroma after baking. And the protein, the gluten and glutenin and gliadin gets properly hydrated and helps in the proper formation of the network without much kneading. That is why autolysis is important. One thing which has to be noted that only the flour and water are included in the autolysis. The starter, the salt, and the other ingredients are not added until after this rest period. If the starter were added to the dough before the autolysis, the yeast action would increase the acidity of the dough, and this acidity would affect the dough strength, making the dough less extensible. And the whole point of autolysis will be gone. And if the salt were added, it would interfere the water absorption of the gluten proteins and interfere with the action of enzymes as well. So why sourdough is back in fashion? Why it is back? It is something 11,000 years old recipe. What brings it back in fad? So we all know that today's society is running behind healthy life, healthy food. So that is the main reason the sourdough is back. Not only it is easy to digest, but it also has a high nutritive content. Also, it has plenty of probiotics, example, the lactobacillus, which is very good for your gut biome. Also, not only the health factor, it also tastes better than your commercial yeast bread. And there are no food additives. There are no food additives added here. Common food additives are redox reagent, emulsifier, your hydrocolloid, or your preservatives. So if you give me 1 minute, I'll explain how sourdough don't actually need these additives. It is self-sufficient. The sourdough is self-sufficient. So redox agent are added to assist the flour to form a gluten network. Since sourdough breads are usually high in hydration factor, like 80%, 75% hydration, the gluten formation is very easy in such doughs. That is why we don't need any redox agent in our sourdough. Coming to emulsifier is added for a softer crumb and dough consistency. Since emulsifier is something which brings your fat and water together. Since your sourdough dough is a retard process of making bread, you don't need actually any type of emulsifier. The use of hydrochloride. Hydrochloride is used to retain the water, and to retain the water, hydrochloride is you must have heard about CMC or agar or a xanthan gum or anything. So these are the common hydrochloride used. But since it is a long process of bread making, we add 75% or plus above that of water in our bread, we don't need hydrochloride. Preservative. Since I already told you about the acid content of the sourdough, which is 3.5 pH, we don't need any preservative coming from foreign preservatives. Thus, it has its natural acidity, and which makes it last longer. Coming to the reference, I took reference from a book, Culinary Institute of America, which is available in our resource center. I also took help from Wikipedia, Sourdough Co. UK, and some YouTube channel, and I took my images from Pinterest.com. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much, Paritosh. Asta and Trisha, you can go ahead. Paritosh will conclude the event at the end of your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So a very good evening to one and all present here. I'm Drisha Bhuvaragan from second year, and today I'm going to explain to you what Sardo and like what Sardo is. Paritosh already explained in brief about what Sardo is, but let me just take you through a starter culture and how you make it. Astha will brief you on how to actually like point by point, process by process. She'll explain it to you. So coming to Sardo, let me just tell you that it takes a lot of time, effort, and patience to make a Sardo starter or a Sardo bread, because but the amount of patience and time goes into it, the better the product is. So coming back to the slide, we can see that it is a mixture of equal amounts of flour and water. So if you're using 100 grams of flour, you use 100 grams of water, and then you keep the mixture aside and you wait for the whole process to begin. Uh, to define Sardo means that it's like a complex community of yeast and bacteria which rely on each other, depend on each other, and slowly it gives a very distinctive taste, flavor, and aroma to the whole bread. The earliest known leavened bread, dates back to about 3700 before Christ era in Switzerland. Now, it also acts as a natural leavening agent. So, a lot of people, while explaining this, was saying that sometimes yeast is added, which is such a big misconception because the point of making a sourdough starter is so that you do not use yeast. Okay, it's a natural leavening agent. It's also called a starter culture because various microorganisms and microbes, they live off each other, they depend on each other, creating a kind of a like a society. So that's how the name culture, I mean the word culture, was added to it. The bacteria, which is lactobacillus, is also present along with wild yeast and their wild variants and strains. What they do is they initiate fermentation to take place, and it also, the lactobacillus bacteria, it gives off a very sour taste, flavor, and a very acidic nature to the whole bread, and it also contributes providing acidity, flavor, and aroma. Now I'm going to show you a microscopic view of the sourdough. Now what you can see, those small bubbles, they are definitely the carbon dioxide molecules which have been released through the yeast present, I mean through the natural yeast present there. Coming to the next slide. Yeah. Here I'm going to talk about wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria, which both are very, very necessary for your sourdough to basically thrive in an environment. So coming to yeast, it's a single celled fungi. It's aerobic because it needs oxygen. There are more than 1,500 known species of yeast present, and more than 20 species and strains are found in a starter. It feeds on simple carbohydrates and it gives off ethanol and acetic acid, which is the reason your sourdough is, it is sour and it keeps the bread fresh. Now, the reproduction of yeast rapidly occurs at warm temperatures, but it's most highly active at 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. So, this is the reason that your sourdough should be kept in room temperature and not cooler or warmer temperatures. Coming to lactic acid bacteria, compared to wild yeast, it is spherical and rod in nature. It's found in, as Paritosh said, it's found in our day-to-day food. It's even, it's in our dairy products, on skins of vegetables and fruits. It feeds on simple sugars and double sugars too. What it does is it gives off lactic acid, which is a natural antibiotic, and it's also sour, and ethanol, which is the reason why our sourdough is sour. Okay, and it lowers the pH. Now what it does, when the pH is lowered, it gives off a very sour flavor. And the second reason the pH, I mean a low pH, is important is it kills off other microorganisms which might harm your starter. Coming to the next slide. This is just a tabular form of the previous slide I explained. I'm not going to explain this, but this is just for your reference. So later on, if you need scientific terms, you can see this. Yeah. Now, coming back to symbiotic relationship, what happens is, suppose let's take an example that our starter has less number of resources. Now, in these resources, let's just call them as simple sugars like glucose, fructose, and maltose. Now, some yeast, what they do is they feed on glucose and fructose, and some yeast they feed on, some lactic acid bacteria, which is LAB, they feed on maltose. So what happens is a stable starter is where these microbes don't compete for food, and there is like a very symbiont relationship. So the yeast is also eating its food, and the lactic acid bacteria is also eating its food, creating in a very symbiotic relationship. Coming to the next slide. Yeah, here it's about how to make your own sourdough starter. Going in brief and depth, Asta will be taking you through that. But before you start off, these are some points that I want you to remember so that your sourdough starter is really, top notch and perfect. So first point is definitely consistency in feeding time to time and patience. Now consistency, because make sure when you start your sourdough starter, you schedule a time, you take a particular slot, suppose say 6 p.m. and feed it to that particular time only, because then your sourdough will be accustomed to be fed at this particular time. As Chinmay said, it's literally like taking care of a baby. So you don't you have to be patient and you have to be consistent. The second point here is to not neglect. Of course, if you like forget to feed it for a day or 2 days, it's fine, but initially make sure that you feed it every day and you take care of it. And coming to the third point is weighing your ingredients. Now, when you weigh your ingredients, as I said, equal amounts of flour and water. But if at all you have weighing scales and instruments, it's easier for you. Also, you will make sure that your sourdough starter is, close to perfect. Next up, we talk about temperature. Keep your sourdough starter in indirect sunlight and also at room temperature. Make sure it's about 27 to 30 degrees Celsius. That's the ideal temperature. Don't bake your bread until your starter is ready. This one goes for obvious reasons, and the way or identification how you know that your starter is ready, that is through float test. Asta will brief you more about on like how to actually do the float test. Use a metallic spoon to stir. What happens is, it's not like you cannot use your what was I saying? Yeah, it's not like you cannot use wooden spoon or your plastic spoon. You can, or using like a metallic spoon is much better. It's much preferred because it acts as an antibacterial, and it acts as like a disinfectant. Okay, use a notepad to track and your days of feeding, your troubleshooting issues. If you notice something unusual like a mold or hooch or something, like if something's unusual, it's easier to have a notepad and track it through. That's all from my side. Now I'll give it to Asta, who will take you through how to make your own starter. Thank you.
Good evening, one and all. I am Astha Vipsa Raut from second year. So basically, a perfect sourdough starts with a perfect sourdough starter or with a great sourdough starter. So I'm just here to share with you some basic points which should be remembered while you start doing your own starter. So basically, there are the ingredients which are needed for this, and I'll be just covering it in the next slide, obviously. And equipment needed, because we need 1 to 2 clear glass containers, because imagine if you are just starting off your starter with only 30 gram of flour, so we will be needing a small container. But gradually, if you use for a bigger business purpose, or like you want a bigger quantity of your starter to go on gradually growing, so basically we'll be taking a large container. And why glass? Because it's very transparent and you'll be able to see all the signs going inside it, like the carbon dioxide molecules will be coming up and it will be bubbling. And also sometimes you'll be forgetting about feeding it once in a week or twice, so you'll be just noticing that your starter hasn't gone bad. So that's the reason why we use glass containers over here, or else plastic, like plastic reflecting, like for example white containers are also perfect. And rubber bands to mark the level, because I want to show my own starter. It's like 2 months old. So basically, I have marked here the rubber band because I have fed it yesterday and I have taken it out from the freeze since yesterday. So after feeding it, after 4 to 8 hours, it just grew half, like twice the amount I have just fed it. So it will be up and down. So basically, it's totally about experimenting on your own starter. So metallic spoon to stir, as Drisha said, we have to take metal spoon, like a clean spoon should be needed. Like it's okay if you will go like using a wooden or plastic or silicone spoon. A measuring scale is a must because uh, you want a perfection, right? Like just Chinmay said, we don't know how, if we measure it through cups, we won't know that how much quantity in the cup the flour is there and how much water is there. So it's totally difficult when you measure your ingredients while using cups. So basically, to have a perfect starter, you should be needing a weighing scale. And then thermometer is optional because we want to have lukewarm water, which I'll be covering it in the next slide. Obviously, I'm just going in. So choice of ingredients. The first comes the type of flour we need. First is organic and non-organic. Organic flour basically means it has high mineral and enzymatic content, which makes it greater for using it in your starter. And also it is not bleached, and it contains less, like it contains no chemical at all. And you can totally go, like you can be totally trustable for going into your own sourdough starter. And why whole wheat and not like whole wheat flour is also there, and refined flour is also. Refined flour is basically your all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour has gone through some chemical processing to make it more whiten, and also aging of flour is needed while you make all-purpose flour. And whole wheat flour, we should start our own starter by using whole wheat because it gives a stronger base to your sourdough starter. It has natural wild yeast and also the bacteria which will be like which are the like which is the called as the culture of microorganisms. So whole wheat flour is much needed. And what is ash content? Ash content is basically the level of minerals are present in the flour after we meal it. So basically, in other words, it means like the higher amount of bran, a higher amount of ash content in your flour. That means higher amount of bran and germ content is there in your flour, which will lead to more flavoring and also in giving you more it retains the water quantity. And also ash content of pastry flour is around 0.45%. And as you know that while we bake sourdough bread is totally called as artisan bread flour is always used by many chefs. So that content is around 0.8%, and that is the highest. And moving on to the next grain used, that is rye flour or the wheat. Basically, whole grain flour is used because it has higher nutrient contents, and also it gives more sourness to your sourdough starter. And the yeast and bacteria get more food when natural flour, like freshly milled flour, has been given to your starter. And talking about the water, it should be filtered, unchlorinated, undistilled, and lukewarm. What does it mean actually? Basically, we can totally go for a purified water, which is like little bit heated up, and we don't know actually what is called a lukewarm. We assume that by dipping it in dipping our fingers into the water, we think that yeah, it is like gone up to certain point of heat, so it's lukewarm. No, actually the perfect temperature for this is actually 32 to 37 degrees Celsius. Just like 1 degree Celsius more to a body temperature and little lower than that. That is called lukewarm. And also we don't use distilled water because distilled water just like makes all the nutrients, minerals dies off. So water is basically only we drink water with no minerals in it. So we totally go for purified water. So in the right side of the slide is mentioned why rye flour is used. Rye flour is basically, when I'll be comparing it to whole wheat has a complicated genetic structure and high gluten content, whereas rye has very low gluten. And low gluten means we won't be needing much kneading or this one or what you can say. It is it is not necessary nor useful. So as we go through the points, speeds up the fermentation process. It means rye flour contains more enzymes and also the mineral content which attracts the other yeast and also the bacteria to feed upon. And also it has very complex starches which the amylase will be breaking down into. And also this the rye flour gives a very diverse area for more food to feed upon for the yeast and bacteria. Rye adds a very unique flavor profile due to the combination of the following: a large variety of yeast, unique enzymatic activity, and also high nutrient profile.
Asta? I think we're kind of running short on time. Could you move on to the main part of making the culture and just brief through it so that we can take maybe 2-3 questions? Would that be okay?
Sure. So I'm just going into the method of how we can use our own, like how we can make our own sourdough starter. So basically, for 1 second. Yeah. So day one. So we have to just look upon how much flour we want to add, like in the starting of a starter. I have taken over here as a reference for about 100 gram of flour and 100 gram of water. So basically, we have to weigh our container and we have to tear it down to 0. And then we add the flour and water and we just mix it and cover it loosely, or else a thin cloth is also okay while covering your own starter. And after, like, it will go upon around 24 hours for the enzymatic activity to surge up and down. So after 24 hours, we'll go up onto the next second day. And also I want to add it over here that if you are staying in a very cold area, for example, Himachal Pradesh or some sort of that, so we can also keep a starter in the top of a fridge. Is like it's ideally preferable because the amount of heat is okay for the starter to grow upon. Then for the second day, we have to discard half of the starter because as enzymes, as all the microorganisms are being there, the microorganisms will automatically grow after feeding upon the food present over there. So that's why we have to discard it. Otherwise, at the end of like certain days, like for example, 7 to 8 days, the weight will be like more than a giant panda. Like preferably it is told like that, but I don't know how come it is true or not. So second day we'll be using the same 100 gram of flour and water and we'll be mixing it to our starter. So it will be around 150 gram of flour and 150 gram of water. And in the third day, some people tell that some people tell that we should be feeding twice from third day onwards. But actually it's not true. It depends upon how much activity has been going on in your starter or not. So if the activity you see, like more carbon dioxide molecules have been taking place and also the increase in the level of your starter has taken place, so we can feed it twice in a day. For example, you feed it at 8 o'clock in the morning. After 12 hours, you should be discarding some amount of it, not half actually, but some amount is okay. And if it doesn't have a stinky flavor, stinky smell, you can also store your discard, which can be used in several purposes. For example, we can use it in making pancakes, English muffins, or something, or some crackers or some sort of that. Moving on, this is for the reference. This picture is totally for the reference. This is the day one, and some bubbles have already been seen over here. And the second is like it has been growing, and in the third day they have fed it twice. So basically, it will in the fourth day we'll look that it has grown like very huge. Moving on to the next slide. Day 4 and 6. Basically, we have to do the same procedure, and here we can actually alternate our flour quantity. Actually, if you are using 100 gram of whole wheat flour, we can just substitute 50 gram of your whole wheat flour and add rye flour or any sort of like ancient grains like spelt flour or something like that, so that your starter will be very healthy and also it will be very nutritious. And on the last day, actually it can take upon 14 to 15 days or some more days, rather than like completing your growing up your starter in 7 days. So it can take up to 20 days or 25 days. It up to you, and also the favorable conditions, for example the temperature, the climatic conditions over there, like you have been staying over there. On the 7th day, I have mentioned here that before you consider your starter to be ready, conduct float test. Float test generally means like before, if you think that your starter has been ready, just before feeding it, just stir it in and some take a cup of a cup of water, sorry, a cup full of it water, and put some drops of your batter. If it floats, then your starter is very ready. And also you can discard some of your starter and use it as a leaven. as Chinmay has already described about it. And then how to know that a starter is ready? Just by looking that is has doubled in size or tripled in size within 4 to 8 hours of feeding. It is little bubbly with clusters of some large pockets of air throughout and on the surface. Smell, it's like yeast. It's basically more of like sour and tangy flavor will be coming from the starter, and and you'll be hearing like small bubbles that is in popping in and out. And here comes the information that you should really know, and the troubleshooting issues that comes up when you when you start using your own starter or you make your own starter. It's totally experimenting, and it is an art of science. So hooch is basically like in after the initial days of feeding, just like third or fourth day, a brown or yellowish liquid will come over your surface. That means it's the ethanol, that is the alcohol that has been produced by the yeast and the bacteria. That is discard actually, because like as the starter has been growing, there will be more alcohol present in your starter. So either you can discard half of it, and half of it you can stir in, because it will initially lead to a very like sorry taste, like it will provide a sorry taste to your bread, sourdough bread, while you bake. And then no extra addition of yeast, because it's totally a disgrace if you are starting to make a starter and you're adding yeast, is totally disgrace. So basically it's not required that you will be adding extra yeast. And what is discard? As I already told that after initial days of feeding, after the stinky smell has been gone off, you can always store your discard rather than throwing it away. And discard can be used in various purposes, such as making pancakes and also in using cakes, as the recipe calls for. And what is tea starter and liquid starter? Here I want to take a little more time, because it's more about hydration. Imagine that your starter has been growing. So consider 100 yeast are present in your starter. So for 100 yeast, do you want to feed for 500 people, or do you want to feed for only 50 people? Obviously, you have to go for the first, because more food means more growing. That doesn't mean that you will be like exceeding the amount of flour that you have been using. It basically means the equal amount of flour and equal amount of water that should be used in your starter. That is called the liquidy starter. Liquid starter basically means 65% hydration, like including your discard and all. Then we can consider it as a 65% hydration, which is like a lava flowy kind of texture it will be given. And what is a Stefan? Stefan basically means after your starter has got ready and it is stored in the fridge, and you will be feeding it once in a week or twice in a week. It's up to you. How far, like how much amount of baking have you been doing in a week or two? So Steve starter usually contributes in giving more sourness, and is totally beneficial for less hydrated pastries and doughs. Recipe outlining the different feeding ratios, that is the amount of starter is to flour is to water. It's totally depend upon the recipe that you have been calling for. And it totally means that we have to take small amount of starter, while we consider like we are taking 10% of your starter, 40% of your flour, and rest is your water. That is the ideal feeding ratio that should be given, because less starter and more food, the more flour means more growth in your starter. And it's the continuation. Some people tell that starter isn't doing anything. Should I throw it away? No. You should be checking it upon, like it can take days. It can take days, because it's totally science. We can't expect that our yeast should be like producing, like yeast basically reproduces like in every 2 hours. So you can imagine how much yeast and bacteria have been there in your starter. So it's totally you have to have be patient, and also you have to take care of your starter very well. And sorry, my starter has a weird smell. Is that normal? It basically depends upon the day you have been feeding or the day of the starter that has been grown to. Alcohol basically means it's hungry and you have to give it a feed. Alcohol basically means the hooch, that is a yellowish or brownish liquid that is present in top of your starter. Fruit or nail polish remover. It's I don't know if I haven't experienced it. It also means the same, because fruit or nail polish remover also contains alcohol in it. So basically, you have to give it a feed and then wait for another 24 hours. Feed are must. It's basically that some new enzymes have been enzymatic activity has been taking place, and also the surge in level up and down has been taking place. So you have to continue feeding as normal, or you can just take a break of 2 or 3 days and see if your starter is still active or not. And then comes the Eastie or the Brady. It's basically ripe and well fed. You have to conduct a float test according to that. If the smell comes of like a Eastie or the Brady kind of thing. Milky or yogurty, it comes after like a certain days, like your starter is ready, and then this flavor comes up. And tangy, sour, or acetive, it's more like vigilant in while you consume your own sourdough bread. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Asta. Paritosh, over to you. Maybe we can take questions. If anybody has, just raise your hand. Unmuted, go ahead.
Thank you, Chinmay. So we learned so many things, great things today, which are about how to make your own starter, like how to make, like how sourdough works, the science behind it, how to make your own bread using a sourdough, and if not sourdough, how to make your own bread with commercially having that having that similar taste using the pre-ferments. I hope now like you want to make your own sourdough bread instead of buying the market one, the tasteless bread. So like you can get the sourdough recipes from our resource center, which is on our website. And there are plenty of books there from like different authors. You can get recipe easily from there. So so our session comes to an end. Now floor is open for any type of questions related to sourdough. We are not professionals, but yeah, if we will be very happy to help you if we could. Any questions? You can just unmute yourself and speak. Yes,
Hello,
bro.
am I audible? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
you.
Firstly, I would like to really appreciate the team, the efforts they put in, and everything and all. Everything has been quite informative and organized. And secondly, I would like to appreciate Astha that she is also practically doing that. So we would like to have the all the observations, whatever she does, and everything. It would be very beneficial because I was I'm probably going to make someday, but yeah, now there are resources out there. It would be very good if we could know how it is done and all that. So that's it. Yeah.
I'm very happy, Dhruv, that you want to make your own sourdough now.
Paritosh, maybe we can ask either Chef Ranaja or Chef Mukherjee to speak a few words if they want to.
Sure. Chef Mukherjee, Ranajai, if you want to speak anything.
शेफ चौधरी आप ही बोलो कुछ या शेफ सेंथिल I don't know if they are there, but okay. Then
No, sir, they are
मैं ही
not
बोल
present
देता हूँ.
here.
Am I audible?
Yes, chef. Yes, chef. You are audible.
Yeah, though it was quite long and I was through my tea and even I went out for some time to buy something, but I was on and I was listening, and all of you have put quite a lot of effort, all the presenters, and hats off to your passion. So let it this passion, let it be alive, because this will inspire others, I'm sure. And we should get a new set of presenters. Yes, Chinmay and the team. Please see that the presenters do not get repeated so much. Let new people get a chance to showcase. So it is not only see this one presentation is a learning for all of us, and it was a learning for the presenter also. And another thing is your presentation skills are also getting honed, right? So so you can and I think what Chinmay and the team can do is after each session like this, okay, give a feedback for each of the presentations that you can do internally, right? That what was the good things about it first the good things, and then what were the things which went wrong in the presentation, where you can improve it. So you can follow this system of feedback for each of the presenters, and you can form a team who will give this